Hey, friends, welcome to episode 592 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am Kevin Huntsberger, joined once again this week by Chad Smart. Chad, welcome back.
Good to be here. Sorry I missed last week, but I had other plans, and you don't rank as high as hanging out with Wayne Brady, Freddie Prinz, and Noel Foley.
Oh, okay. All right. So obviously, yeah, that's the reason why, or part of the reason why you weren't here last week is AEW Revolution happening not too far from you. Talk to us a little bit about the show. What is the vibe? And we've talked before about comparing and contrasting between WrestleMania and because that's the shows that I've been to with you.
Yeah.
But we've also been to Money in the Bank before. So how does an AEW event, Revolution, let's go specifically with, compared to other wrestling pay-per-views that you've been to, specifically on the WWE side?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think Money in the Bank
17.
2017. I'm trying to think if that was the last non-WrestleMania WWE pay-per-view that I've gone to. I don't think I went to SummerSlam after that. No, I take it back. Royal Rumble 2018, the first women's Royal Rumble was there. Um, yeah, obviously AEW is much smaller than a WrestleMania, although the first couple of pay-per-views, or first pay-per-view, I guess they did out here, was at the Kia Forum, which is where the Lakers used to play back in the 80s. And it's a smaller venue. And now they have what used to be the Staples Center. Now it's the crypto.com Bitcoin throw your money away center, which I just shortened to the crypt. Um, and this one, they was sold out bigger. They did the same. They did Revolution there last year as well.
Mhm.
Sold more tickets this year. It was a lively crowd. It's fun and I guess the biggest comparison, and again, this is like comparing Granny Smiths to Red Delicious apples. It's not apples and oranges, but it's not the exact same thing. I was sitting seventh row on the floor across from the entranceway, and for that price, I could buy a seat in the top upper deck at WrestleMania this year.
Mm.
So before discounts.
Is that with the
But it,
15-day discount?
Yeah, it would be my Revolution ticket probably was more expensive if I used the 316 discount. But yeah, I took a friend who I hadn't seen in probably 10 years, and I'd taken him to a PWG show 12, 13 years ago, and didn't even know he was really into wrestling until I saw him pop up on Twitter and talking about John Cena and stuff. And I was like, hey, do you want to go to this show with me? And he's like, yeah, it's great. So he's just getting into AEW.
Okay.
But it was fun to be there with him. He had come in. The other part of why I wasn't on the show is I was in San Diego on Friday and Saturday. And he was like, you're insane, going to San Diego for the weekend and driving up here for the show, like to have the stamina. I'm like, that's nothing. Like, I mean, we've done, long road trips before, WrestleMania 30,
Mhm.
WrestleMania 22. But yes, I did not get much sleep in San Diego. I was crashing on a couch that was not very comfortable. And Saturday in San Diego was a exercise in patience, as everywhere we went was the busiest places apparently in San Diego, and had to like wait 15 minutes for parking and drive around parking lots. So it was just very mind taxing. And then a 2.5 hour drive back from San Diego to get to the crypt. So yeah, by the time the show was going, I realized again I am old, and my stamina probably wasn't what it needed to be for a 27-hour long AEW show. And also, like I said, we were in the seventh row, but the people in front of us were standing for the majority of the show,
Uh,
which I'm like, you're on the floor, you're not,
right.
unless they're fighting like right in front of the railing in front of it, you're not seeing anything better. And I had a small kid behind me, so I didn't want to be standing and blocking his view, although
Right.
the people in front of us were probably blocking it. So I think overall, as an experience, last year's Revolution was a better experience for me and I think last year's show was a little bit better. This show was good, and you know I've seen all the YouTube videos and comments about best show of the year or one of AEW's best pay per views, but this is one that I think could have had at least one or two matches cut out. I
Hmm.
think it did go run a little long, and the main event I just felt it was a Texas death match that just felt like a greatest hits. Um, you know, it's like, oh, okay, there's glass, there's the syringe, there's, you know, everything we've seen before in other matches without really any new take on it. So it was
Do
better
you
than the main
like that
event.
kind of stuff though? Do you like the
What
deathmatch style?
I don't, I don't mind it. The only thing I really don't like is the skewers in the
I
head.
was going to say I don't like the skewers at all, and I don't get the.
I think those dumb. I think this the syringe to me is just a visual
Hmm.
thing, like
Right, right, yeah,
because I don't like. I think stapling somebody or dragging them through glass is more painful than
right,
a syringe.
yeah.
But the syringe, again, visually is going to make people go, you know, react
Because
better.
you don't know
So
where that syringe was before either. I
right,
think is
and
that's the allure.
yeah, yeah, and I don't know where he pulled where MJF pulled the syringe from. You know, where are they keeping it is whatever. But yeah, overall, though, it was a good show. Like I said, lively crowd. They're into pretty much everything.
Yeah, it seemed
I
like they were
just,
the whole time. So
yeah, I just, for me, I don't think this one, like last year, we had the Will Ospreay, Kyle Fletcher cage match. We had the Mariah May, Tony Storm Hollywood ending match.
oh yeah,
Speaking of death matches, um, and I think there were just, I don't think there was anything on this show that was up to that level. But
really.
the matches were good. But the matches were all good. It
Yeah.
just, yeah,
Well, and it becomes it's almost to me, because I do listen to the Conrad podcast. I love
mm,
Conrad, but as much as he denies, he is an AEW shill, and I get it. He's friends with a
mm,
lot of those guys, and some of those people employed by AEW are his co-host as well. So I
mm,
get that whole thing. But when literally every month or every pay-per-view that rolls around, because I
yeah,
know we do monthly, it is this was the best pay-per-view AEW has done. This was and
mm,
it turns into Tony Schiavone's, when he was kind of parodied back in the WCW days of saying,
yeah,
this is the greatest night in or this is the biggest night in the
yeah.
history of our great sport, or whatever he used to say. So it's the boy who cries wolf. I did like MJF's tribute to Terry Funk.
That was very nice. Yes.
Obviously, you couldn't see it because you were not watching it on TV or on the internet, but I'm
Yeah.
sure you've seen the imagery of Paige's blood-soaked head hitting the camera and how they ended the show with the blood. If you're into that kind of thing, it's
Yeah.
great. Uh, I'm not into the blood and whatnot, but I did think that was a cool visual way to end that epic battle and kind of, pardon the pun, close or turn the page on Hangman's next move. What happens
Yeah.
next for him since he went in. Did you think he was going to lose this one, or because people were like, "Well, with that stip," but then they were pointing out afterward, "Oh, he made that stip."
It's a verbal. Yeah. I think Tony Khan's comments kind of undercut the stipulation a little bit, but
Okay,
at least he's being honest. Like,
right,
well, there was no you know, it wasn't a contract
yeah, sure,
statement. Um, I like I said, people were standing most of it, so I did end up watching a lot of it on the monitors or on the screens.
okay.
So, but also that match, like I said, went way too long. I think it
Mhm.
was like 40, 45 minutes long. It
I think it was
easily could have been,
47 minutes. Yeah.
yeah, easily could have cut out 10 minutes. And so I think it was kind of like the Undertaker Brock match at WrestleMania 30, where I really wasn't paying that close attention because I kind of figured
Oh
MJF
yeah.
was going to win, you know?
Yeah.
So I just looked up and I saw the blood on the screen, but I didn't see the full ending. Um, I I didn't think Page was going to win because I think MJF, and I mean, and this is where we get into the battle of booking of like how long does a title reign need to go, you know,
Right.
to be good or meaningful or not be hot shotted. Um, you know, they did the stipulation early on in AEW with Cody Rhodes doing the same thing, where and he lost, and people didn't take to it. And I think at that time it was too early to do a stipulation like that. I mean, had we known Cody was only going to be around for, a few more months or a year, that probably would have changed people's perception. But like I said, I think with Hangman, the story that has been told over the 6 years is, okay, what is Hangman going to do now?
Mm,
And granted, there's like 57 other titles in AEW for
right.
Hangman to go after.
Yeah.
I do think at some point that's his stipulation. He will go back on that stipulation,
Yeah.
and if it's a heel turn, or
Right. Someone push it.
or it could be a heel turn, or it could be another. Had this happened 2 years ago, and then the Death Rider story comes along, and you have John Moxley, kidnapping the title and being like, Hangman could come out and be like, "Look, I said I wasn't going to challenge for it, but this company needs to be saved, and
Yeah.
so screw the stipulation. I'm take for AEW." So yeah, I mean, now if he comes back next month and challenges for the title, no,
Right.
but they play it out for a year, and it's not like AEW is lacking in terms of challengers
Right.
for
They
MJF.
have a great.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Oh, I got to ask one more thing, and it's kind of the elephant in the room at this point. You are wearing a Jushin Thunder Liger shirt that I'm assuming came from Pro Wrestling Crate and not the AEW stand. We've talked before about the
yes,
lack of depth of AEW merch at a live
yeah,
event. So has that improved at all?
there. I mean, we did kind of check out the merchandise stands. It seemed like a better variety.
Uh,
Um, they also did not immediately, like, we left to go get something to eat during the trios tag titles match, which was later in the show than I would have preferred because I was really hungry. Um, but they still have plenty of. It looked like they still have plenty of merch, and
God, that popped me.
I don't know what I was. Yeah, yeah. Those were like the two trios matches were my bathroom break matches, and I was like, "Come on, let's get to it." Why is Snooki wrestling so late in the show, Dan? Um, that's an inside joke for just Kevin. Yeah. But the only thing I know they had like action figures that were $50, and I don't know if they were signed or because I didn't go up and really look, and they
Yeah.
were selling a lucha mask with the LA Chargers lightning
Oh
bolt
yeah,
logo
I
on
heard
it.
they were going to start doing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not see one for the Rams, which I think they would have sold more Rams than Chargers because this is LA. No one really cares about the Chargers. They should go back to San Diego. But yeah, the merchandise when we first got in, the lines were long, but again, they apparently must have had enough merchandise that they did not sell. And I'm trying to think. I know there was a Moxley shirt um, and obviously an MJF. I did not see the big Hebrew T-shirt that I said I would buy if it was there. Um, but but yeah, they did have three stands that I saw, so that was better than yeah.
Getting
And
better.
you could do upper deck kind of thing where you could create your own um, trading card.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Anything else about evolution, or I'm sorry, revolution that before we move on to this week's topic?
No, I mean, I think it was good. I thought when you said the elephant in the room, I thought you were going to bring up Ronda Rousey's appearance.
Well,
I
she's not in
don't.
the room with us.
um,
Is she?
uh, she's also not in the room with AEW. So, yeah, I don't know. I think it was a nice surprise. I don't know what's going to come of it. You know, but I think that was the other thing too. Is like the first four matches all had like a return or some debut, like Edge and Christian or Cope and Christian.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Christian and Cope, as the T-shirt says. Christian takes top billing now.
Right.
Kenny Omega, Ronda Rousey, and Will Ospreay, and I think those could have been spread out a little better
Better, you mean through the night or
throughout the night. Yeah.
Dynamite?
Oh
Because
yeah. Even either way. Yeah.
does Dynamite have the reputation like the Wednesday after, like the Raw after WrestleMania over the last, I don't know, 25 years? It's kind of built a reputation. Was Dynamite any flavor, or could some of those surprises been saved for that, do you think?
They could have, although given the crowd that was at Dynamite, I don't think they deserved those
Are they
types of
still in
surprises.
California? or were
They
they?
were, yeah, they were in Fresno, and it was a very, granted, the show itself, I don't think was a great follow up. And again, Tony Storm got pulled from the show earlier in the day for whatever reasons, as we discussed before recording. Still don't know what
Mhm.
her situation is. Um, but I think I think especially like Kenny Omega could have been saved for Dynamite instead of, although, um, and they're already doing Omega Swerve 2 next week instead of saving that for the pay per view, which is the other thing with AEW. And I think, we've kind of, I've discussed my issues with WWE of repetitive booking, whereas I think AEW is like, hey, here's the new thing, and we're going for it this week. Okay, now we're going on to this thing this week. And some of it gets built up and some of it is kind of just like, here it is. There's, it's for the ADHD audience. You're just getting it out there. But again, they have the roster that is so large that they can do that on weekly dynamites and then still put on quality pay-per-views. So,
Yeah. Well, we're
but
gonna
yes, I agree. I do agree that I think pacing could have been better.
we'll talk a little bit more AEW with this week's topic, but before we get to that, we're gonna do a blind round. And this week's topic is what if WCW had bought WWE and instead of the other way around, because this week coming up here on Thursday, it marks the 25-year anniversary of WCW, the Monday Nitro, where Vince McMahon shows up on the simulcast and announces that he has purchased WCW. I was legit surprised about that move. And Chad, I want to know because obviously fans are very critical of the way the invasion was booked after the purchase. And
Mhm.
I think sometimes we forget, we lose sight of the fact that there were a lot of the top tier stars who were under contract still from AOL Time Warner, and they were going to cash out on that. And so the veterans, the guys that you wanted to see as a part of
Yeah.
this are getting paid to stay home basically. And I don't fault them for that. I mean, in our minds as fans, though, we wanted Austin and Goldberg, and we
Mhm.
wanted Hogan and the NWO to come in
Yeah.
and all this stuff. And eventually, most of them did, but it took time, obviously, for those contracts to expire. So when we get to that part of the show, we're going to talk as if WCW makes or Turner makes the purchase, and Vince has gone bankrupt, and contracts are open. They're buying
Mhm.
everything, whereas I think McMahon's intent was more to get the library and not necessarily the talent. But before we get there, let's say that everyone was free agent on day one of the purchase. Of these five superstars or of these five wrestlers, who would you have wanted to see immediately put into a program main event level in WCW or in WWE? And we're
Um,
going to start things off hot with the Stinger, who was that one that kind of got away, I think, when it comes to the WWE. Even though he came in many years later, it was definitely not what it could have been, and my opinion should have been. I would have hoped he would have come out sooner.
yeah, I was going to say this is based on being in 2001 and not knowing what happens
Right.
afterwards and
Yep. This is 2001.
how
This is March 26th. So on March 26th, 2021, on
yeah,
2001 rather, is when Vince announces he's purchased it. So we're looking at that next week on Raw. Who is coming out from
yeah,
WCW to be a part of the show? And Sting is one of those free agents.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think you have to put Sting at number one. He was the guy people wanted to see. That, and I don't fully understand why Sting and Undertaker were always like that dream match, other than being the two loyalists for the companies. But um, but yeah, Sting has to be because most of the other guys, with the exception of like say Booker T, who probably going to maybe show up later, had been in WWE at some point.
Mhm.
So Sting was the holy grail.
Alrighty, number two, one of the founding members of the NWO, Kevin Nash.
Um, I want to put Nat. So now, do I go with my own personal bias or fan bias?
Yeah,
I'm putting Nash. I'm putting Nash at 5 just because, again, he had been there. We'd seen what he'd done as Diesel.
yeah.
I mean, as Kevin Nash, I think he's more personality than, in ring expert. So, um, yeah, I don't, especially given what they did with him when he came in, which I know should take into consideration for this blind ranking. But yeah, F5, I don't think Nash was needed back in WWE.
Here is a tag team. Now, one half did come in, but the other half we never did see in a WWE ring, and that is Harlem Heat.
Um, yeah, I mean, even at this point in 2001, I believe they had split up
Hmm.
and weren't fighting because Booker won the title on the last Nitro.
Yes.
As a tag team, I'm going to put them number three because I think they could have had some good tag matches with whoever was in the WWE tag team scene at that time, which I can't recall
I know,
the
right?
top names, but yeah, and I'm surprised Stevie Ray never did show up.
I know. I always wondered what happened there. I don't know that he's ever.
Yeah.
I'm sure he has. I just never heard it. Number four is someone that eventually, all these guys eventually show up, but would it have been more impactful if Goldberg had come in right after the purchase was made?
I think it would have. I think it would have been more impactful had he come in in the spring of '97 before Austin gets injured, but probably not because Goldberg wasn't a thing back then. But hey, uh, yeah, if he came in 2001, Austin is still around. I don't think he would have gotten an Austin Goldberg match even then, but I'm going to put him at four because I don't, especially at that time in WWE, I don't think he would have been booked the way Goldberg was booked, and so I don't think it would have worked out.
Yeah. Well, in the last pick is going to go in at number two, and
Lash
that
LaRue, Lash LaRue.
not
Oh no,
last,
yeah, I guess he gave it up.
but Hollywood Hogan, who, um, people pined for the Hogan Austin match too for a long time, and
Mm.
eventually we got Hogan and Rock. Where are you on Hogan and Austin? Would it have worked? I mean, both of them by that time are in pretty bad. I
Yeah,
love Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Hulk Hogan was always a constant too. So I mean,
yeah,
but physically, I don't know that that would have been the match that we would have wanted to see versus it happening, say even 5 years earlier in the late '90s, when both of
mhm.
them are getting red hot with the NWO and the Attitude Era, respectively.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would have been a smoke and mirrors match, like where they wouldn't have to do anything.
Yeah,
I mean, it was kind of like Hogan and Rock, where you could just stare down for 30 seconds, let the crowd eat it up, throw a couple of punches. You don't have to go out there and reinvent the wheel or do all types of flash. So I think Hogan coming back to WWE would have been huge, no matter what when he did it,
right.
and I think fans would have cheered for him. And yeah, so I think putting him at two is a fair placement.
So when you think back to 2001, obviously you're watching. Did you know? I think I've told the story before. We had gone to, this was before smartphone era, so uh,
Mm-hmm.
did not have the internet in my pocket. We had been in Texas that whole week before for my brother's wedding and got back to my parents' house. I think it was maybe a few days before Raw. And this was back when I was still checking the rec.sports.pro
Mm-hmm.
wrestling site. And there was talk of Vince McMahon buying WCW. And I was like, no way, fake news. This was before fake
Yeah.
news was a thing. But I'm like, there's no way this is happening. And then I remember watching that night and being like completely, to me, it was one of because there was no social media either. So when I was checking the internet, I was going to WWE.com or this rec sport, and so there's all kinds of speculation. But how were you surprised? Did you see this coming? What did you think when you saw it and heard it?
I'm trying to remember, but I believe because I did have access to the internet during the day, that I think I saw something about
Hmm.
Shane being there and Vince had bought it. And I still think it was surreal when you turn on
Oh
Nitro
yeah.
and Vince is there, but I don't think it was as big of a shock as it would have been without the internet.
Yeah. Were you one that I'm gonna guess especially in the early days of
Mhm.
Nitro, I was flipping back and forth. Well, in the very early days of Nitro, I was working on Monday night. And
Mhm.
so I would record Raw and then I would watch the replay of Nitro and then watch the recorded Raw on
Mhm.
VHS later. But were you flipping, when I had a different job and was able to kind of flip back and forth and that little button on the cable box boop,
In the
boop,
back, yep.
made it so much easier to do that than today. If there were a war today, you wouldn't be able to do it. You'd have to get out of
Have
food,
two TV. You'd have a
or have two TVs going on. Yeah.
TV and your computer going at the same time. Yeah, yeah. I remember in the early days, I would go over to my cousins. We'd have some friends come over, and we would. I think we mainly watched Nitro, recorded Raw.
Mhm.
We'd flip over during a commercial break to see what was going on, but we'd watch Nitro and then watch Raw afterwards. And then I remember um, being down in Southern Illinois, and the SI Bowl advertised like come out on Monday nights, watch Nitro and Raw.
Oh,
And
nice.
so some friends and I went one time, and all they were doing was flipping back and forth between
Oh,
channels. It was like, what the hell is this? Yeah.
nice.
So we did it once.
So you
Once.
were primarily a WCW guy. I mean, you watched
Yes.
both, obviously, but if you had to choose, you were going to watch Nitro.
Yes.
Did that ever change through the course? Because obviously there were ebbs and flows with both companies, and we really saw WCW kind of get ridiculous with some of the stuff. And some people blame Vince Russo for that. I think even before he came in, it was starting to, everything what goes up must come down eventually, and we are seeing it happen
Yeah.
with WWE even. Um, was there a point though where you were watching Raw over Nitro, primarily, or and I guess my question is, what was it about WCW that captivated you better or more so than WWE?
I don't recall watching Raw over Nitro being the primary
Mhm.
program, but I think obviously one, it was when it started, Nitro was live.
Yeah.
At first Raw was only live 1 week out of the month.
Hmm.
And then when you had Eric Bischoff giving off the results, you're like, oh well, let me watch this. And then you had the surprises and the debut, which again, as we were just kind of discussing with AEW, is like that's great, but you can overdo it to the point where then when you don't have that surprise or you don't have something, then it feels like a letdown, and you're like, why am I what? Um, but for me, like I said, it's always been about the wrestling, and to me, WCW was more wrestling focused than entertainment focused, which is why I think when they tried to go purely entertainment or more entertainment, it didn't work because it didn't fit that brand. Um, but I mean, I think, obviously in the early days of 90s, 96, 97, 98, when you had the NWO running wild,
Hmm.
um, that's what drew it in. And then 99, 2000, when it was more, when WWE had come back and taken the lead, and you had The Rock and you had Stone Cold at his height of popularity. Um, I still think Nitro was my show of choice, but I couldn't deny that WWE was putting on I don't necessarily want to say better show, but a fresher show. And I, like I said, the Survivor Series, Deadly Games, '98 in St. Louis is probably the best story wise pay per view in wrestling.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it is hard to explain the differences because I was just kind of doing the math in my head while you were talking about that. Hulk Hogan, while it wasn't quite as long, but he was in WCW for almost as long as he was in WWE. And I think sometimes people forget about or maybe lose sight of that. Like when
Mhm.
you think of WCW, or at least for me, I think of Flair and the Horsemen and Lex Luger and Sting and Dusty Rhodes and those
Mhm.
guys. But Hulk Hogan, and especially as the champion, and I know that there's a whole argument about creative and all that, but I mean, Hulk Hogan really is one of the few that became big time players in both companies and led them, obviously he led the golden era of WWE. And then I think he was, him turning heel and joining the NWO is what's responsible for igniting that Monday Night War. I don't know without the NWO if either side, takes a dominant role. It was a lot of
Mhm.
back and forth before the NWO started, but then once it got up and running, it really dominated.
Yeah.
Um, but again, obviously, we saw it with the bloodline.
Mhm.
Those
Yeah.
stories eventually have to end and you have to have something else to go to. And I don't know if guys like Eric Bischoff, who were writing the show, got burned out along the way. The talent gets burned out along the way. What happens there?
Well, I think we've discussed before that, in the 80s of WWE, WWF, when Hogan was on top, and then all of a sudden he's gone, or the fans start going, there was nothing in place. I mean, you can say the Ultimate Warrior, but I think given his history, putting the eggs in the Warrior basket wasn't a wise decision.
Mhm.
Um, and I think same way with NWO of being like, oh, the NWO is so hot, but like you said, everything that goes up has to come down. What do you do next? The bloodline. What do you do next? And I don't know if it's just short sightedness or uh, you know or incompetence to plan ahead and say, okay, what are we going to do? First off, how is the story going to end? Which is, I think, in writing is the second question you after you ask how does the story begin, you need to ask how does the story end, and then work there, and so that you're not just retreading and carrying things on. Um, you know, I was going to say, talking about the NWO, you're talking about Raw Nitro being back and forth, no dominance. I saw a story this week, and who knows the validity of it. I don't know if you saw it, that allegedly in '96, Vince McMahon wanted to kill off the Stone Cold character and go back to the Ringmaster.
Oh,
And
I hadn't seen that. No.
and
God, can you imagine that?
and yeah, and that's the thing is like, you know, I think if we've said before, if you don't have the NWO and you don't have WCW 83 weeks,
Right.
Vince McMahon doesn't have a reason to evolve his company.
Yeah.
And we look at fans today who are like, "Oh, LA Knight should be champion." It's and who knows if he'll ever be champion. But then you look back at the point I'm trying to make here is Austin 316 happened almost 18 months before Austin became champion.
Right.
It wasn't like the fans got right behind him and then he became champ. Like in
Right.
today, if social media had been around then, Austin's being buried. He's why won't they push you and all this? So, um, but again, I don't think that happens unless it needed to happen. And also Brett. So I'll throw out this question to you, which is going to be off topic, but Vince telling Brett they can't afford him and then his 20-year contract, legitimate, or does Vince know that Brett is not the guy to build the company around and needs a way to get him out of the company?
Like he had buyer's remorse doing the
Yeah.
big contract. That I have thought about that, and it as quickly as he turned on that,
Mhm.
it does make me think maybe there was something else going on there that I don't know if someone got in his ear after the deal was done. Because I do think that Vince has had the reputation, because obviously neither of us have met him, talked to him, know what he's really
Right.
truly like. But based on his previous,
He sent me some texts the other day. They were
yeah, I don't think he's uh, when it comes to business, he's going to do what's best for business, and I think that he is loyal to an extent as well. But I think he's also going to be the one, he wants to make that call. If Brett had left, I think he would have been distraught and downtrodden and
Mm,
whatever on his own accord. But I think that yeah, I do think because listen, I like Bret Hart. I liked Bret Hart back then. I did think that the 97 Hart Foundation heel run was probably my favorite incarnation of Bret Hart.
yeah.
Um, but I also don't, we talked about that sameness of Hulkamania, and you know, Bret never when Bret and Neidhart, when Jim the Anvil Neidhart and Bret Hart broke up,
Mm,
when we saw the Rockers break up, Shawn Michaels got a whole new look and persona. Um, we never got that with Bret Hart. And so we're talking uh, 84 to 97. Bret is still in the pink and black, basically. Attitude changed a little bit, but there was not you know what I mean? Like the character
mhm.
felt like needed something.
Something.
And it was getting there, but it was not quite there. And so, yeah, I think that maybe Vince saw the light and thought, this guy has been around for a long time, and we needed Stone Cold, and Brett helped create that Stone Cold. You know what I mean? Like I feel like he
Mhm.
got him ready. And I don't remember if I sent you the meme or not, but Bret Hart getting flowers online the other day for
Mm.
getting Stone Cold ready, getting I think the thing said something about the because I think he defended The Rock backstage when others were
Mm.
kind of shitting on him, and I'm trying to think of who the other character was that is still kind of known to
Goldberg.
Goldberg. Yeah. Uh, so, you know, Bret Hart deserves his flowers and has a place in history, but
Yeah.
I do often wonder, had he not left, what would have happened with the company as well, because I
Yeah.
don't see him taking us into the Attitude Era the
Mm.
way the Attitude Era was
Let's
structured.
here now. Here's a question that just came up, and again, kind of derailing the conversation. But let's say Vince goes to Brett, says, "Look, I can't afford this contract. Call WCW, get your money." Basically,
Hmm.
Brett says, "I appreciate you being honest with me. I will drop the title to Sean at Survivor Series." Brett does the honors. There's no screw job. There's no Mr. McMahon character. How does that change the Attitude Era?
Drastically, I think without the screw job, the Attitude Era doesn't happen the way we experienced it, because I think obviously the biggest draw, yeah, you had DX crotch chopping and
Mm-hmm.
saying suck it. You had the androgyny of Gold Dust. You had some of the sexuality with Mark Henry and all that kind of stuff. But I think the driving
I
force,
prefer the sexuality of Sable, but you do
right?
you.
Well, you know how the
Yes, I know.
uh,
Sexual chocolate, yes.
in the hand and all that,
Yeah.
But I feel like with
But if
Austin,
you take out Austin McMahon, how does
it
that?
it's not okay. So the reason it worked, in my opinion, is Austin McMahon, although not real, was the most realistic thing of the Attitude Era. How many
Mhm.
people want to tell their boss off, flip their boss off, drink beer on the job? We could what's the word? Vicariously live through Stone Cold
Mhm.
Steve Austin. I can't relate with a guy attaching a woman to a symbol and then rising her up above the ring. I don't relate to that. I don't relate
Okay.
some of the other more, the Val Venus character or Gold, those are not relatable. But yeah, I wanted to tell my boss to kiss my ass and give him the bird. And so I was able to watch that every week. And I think that's why it worked. Without that evil McMahon character, I don't think the Attitude Era takes off the way that it did. And Eric Bischoff is always quick to point out that he was first that evil authority figure. And Eric Bischoff, it helped that he had a punchable face and was kind of, giving away spoilers and stuff. So fans did want to see him get his ass kicked as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between evil Booker
yeah,
Eric Bischoff and evil owner Vince
right.
McMahon. Although, I mean, again, we go logic in an illogical situation. If McMahon hated Austin so much, why didn't he just fire him?
Right, right.
You know, but Eric being, behind the NWO, just it didn't have the same panache.
Yeah.
It just didn't. Which again, I also think comes along with booking the people against the NWO.
Hmm.
At least Austin had The Rock and he had Mick Foley, um, you know, Undertaker. These guys that could go one on one with him, whereas the NWO, you know, they built up Sting. That match was a letdown
Yeah,
for whatever reason.
right.
Um, Luger, Flair, they were, even though they were, top tier and former champions, never felt like they were on the NWO level.
Right. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So now if let's say, Vince loses, gets bought out, do you see him becoming a character on Nitro or, because it's Turner, they own all these TV
Yeah.
stations and whatnot. Do you see, because at one time there was talk that WWE was going to have a Nitro like show, whether they turned SmackDown into that or whatever the
Mhm.
case is going to be. Would you have seen an opportunity for Turner to keep Raw, keep the name, and put it on another night of the week and keep it separate, or do we do the because the NWO Invasion is still 5 years
Yeah.
previously? Does an invasion angle work with the purchase of WCW? And does Vince come in as a character and obviously not in any sort of
Yeah.
supervisory capacity? I can't see his ego allowing that to happen.
No.
But what are your thoughts?
No, I think so. I think the main point to get out of the way in terms of realistic
Hmm.
ish booking is it starts and stops with Turner Broadcasting and the people in charge there. And the whole discussion about what killed WCW, to me, it's always going to come down to the guy who said, "I don't want wrestling on Turner Television."
Exactly. Yeah.
Without that, you have no company.
Yep.
It
Yep.
doesn't matter how bad the booking is, how much money you're losing. You lose the TV deal, you're gone. So let's take that out of the equation and just say Turner's going to continue running. AOL Turner's going to run with wrestling. I I don't see Vince coming in, even a year later, like Bischoff ended up doing. I
Yeah.
don't think, like I said, I think Vince's ego would say, "I'm going to create another company, and I'm going to prove what I can do again."
And we're going to get there in a minute too.
Okay.
So keep that in your pocket.
Okay. I don't think a I'm going to go back to kind of what I said earlier. I don't think a WWE invasion would work in WCW because of the style that WCW was as opposed to WWE. I don't think when you bring in personalities like The Rock, like Austin, like Stone Cold,
Mhm.
I mean, because again, Austin had been in WCW, and we always talk about, oh, Bischoff missed the boat on these guys, Vince
Yeah.
missed the boat on. And it's like you can't really say it because it's the character that gets developed, and the Austin character was developed because of situations that happened in WWE,
Hmm.
WWF. You
Sure.
know, it wasn't just a straight up here's the same character. Gold Dust. Dustin Rhodes isn't going to become Gold Dust in WCW.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So in that case, I don't think WCW would have known how to handle characters.
Yeah. So here's the big what if, probably
Vern
the
Gagne buys them all.
rippling effect of all of this. famously on that Nitro or Raw, I don't know which broadcast it was, but Vince McMahon says JEFFJARRETT, your FIRED. So he fires Jeff Jarrett. So we know Jeff Jarrett is not going to be, I think in the moment we maybe thought it was part of an angle, but obviously McMahon is cutting ties with Jarrett completely.
Yeah.
And a year later, a year-ish later, TNA, Total Nonstop Action, is born. Jeff Jarrett, his father, Jerry Jarrett, get some partners and open a new wrestling company. Around this same time, Ring of Honor is also developing, and I don't know if there were any ties from the old WCW fallout from that or not.
Mm.
But my question for you is, obviously, if WCW is in control and buys it, Jeff Jarrett does not start TNA. I don't know if he eventually goes and does that or not, but you mentioned Vince McMahon. I see, because my question was going to be who from the WWE side that maybe wouldn't have been brought over, do you see spurring off and because I don't think there's ever going to truly be a monopoly. For a long time there was a monopoly.
Mm.
Not, but for argument's sake, before
Yeah.
AEW came in. Do we see Vince a year or so, or I'm sure there were would have been stipulations set forth that you can't do XYZ for a certain amount of time. But when the time comes, do the McMahons start a new wrestling company from the ground up, or do you see another wrestler or talent like a Jeff Jarrett, but on the WWE side of things? Brian James had a rich history of family history of wrestling. Does someone else start up a TNA style show, style product, if you will?
I think Ring of Honor would have still existed because what that was created to do is different than what WCW, WWF, and TNA were doing. Even though in the early
Does
days there was
Ring
a
of
lot
Honor
of
come after TNA?
it came before. It came
It did.
about 4 months before, 3, 4 months before.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
But they were using a lot of the same roster
Uh-huh.
to start with
Sure.
until TNA pulled their guys from Ring of Honor. Again, and this goes again to how territories were able to exist where back in the day that wouldn't happen today because in Ring of Honor you had Raven and CM Punk feuding, and in TNA they were in a stable together. So I think that booking, contradictions exposes the business to be not real. I think Vince, unless depending on how much time, and I'm like you said, there probably would have been a no compete clause for at least X amount of years.
Yeah.
Which honestly could have benefited Vince because it could have given him time to put things in motion instead of. I don't know how long TNA was in the works before it started, but I feel like they could have used like another year of figuring out what they wanted to be.
What do you remember what month TNA started in
June.
of 2002?
Mhm.
Okay, because Jeff has referred on his podcast, I think he's talking about the summer of '01 as the summer of no
Mhm.
worries. And I think that's where he and Jerry started the process.
Classes.
So it was about a year planning process is if I'm remembering what he had said
Okay.
previous podcast about it.
Yeah. It would be interesting because I think if going off this situation, I think Vince would have started something. I don't think Austin would have gone to WCW because the history with Bischoff that he had, and also his better days were behind him, wrestling wise. So that's when, if Vince does start a new company, does it bring Austin in, or is Austin too far gone to be
Right. Yeah, by then, but if there was a couple year because he
in
retired in air
2002?
quotes in '03. So
Three.
yeah. Do you
And obviously, The Rock is off in Hollywood. He's not
yeah,
going to come back for a startup, and he's not going. I don't think he would have gone to WCW. So then it's like, Triple H, Shawn, who does Vince have to build? Can you build a company around the Undertaker?
Right. In 2002 or three, yeah.
Yeah.
And Sean, or I'm sorry, Stephanie and Hunter, I think, are married by this point too. So
Mm,
you don't think Hunter goes, I guess if they know, hey, we got to sit this out for a few years, I could see Trips waiting and
yeah.
developing this new version of WWE. I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is if Vince isn't doing it, do Shane, proper grammar, do Shane and Stephanie, you know, get involved somehow? Or, we've seen Shane leave WWF and go do other business ventures. Is that his lot in life? And Stephanie, does she become a stay-at-home mom
Yeah.
and just, you know,
I think about it too because that was like weeks before, or might have been a week before. I don't know if that was the go home for before WrestleMania that year, but that was one of the bigger WrestleMania. I think that was WrestleMania 17, and that was,
mhm,
I think a lot of fans still revere that. Could you imagine how much more intense obviously though they had the card pretty much booked and ready to go, but
yeah,
could you have imagined being able to insert Goldberg or Sting or someone else into that show? I mean, that would have been insane, but
yeah,
it's hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that WrestleMania, well, WWF at that time too, no longer being a thing, and
mhm,
seeing WWE very sporadically. I think they've dusted off the Halloween Havoc name for NXT, and Great American Bash was a thing, but we
mhm,
never really got the full Starcade, and I guess some of the logic being because WWE's mind, the fans view those as failed. Adventure or ventures. And
mhm,
so I wonder would WCW have used WrestleMania still as an event and used the name, use some of those names that had become synonymous with pop culture because
yeah,
obviously the value was there. But if WCW wins the war, obviously there have got to be some losers and do the names do you associate Starcade with a failed brand, or do you think back to the nostalgia of being a kid and watching Starcade? I went to one live. I think you went to a Starcade as well.
mhm. My first pay-per-view.
Yeah. So are you? Yeah, mine too. So
Mhm,
are you and I think we're more diehard and we watched both products, whereas
mhm,
WCW or WWE fans were more diehard WWE. So I could see where because I think a lot of people didn't recognize Cactus Jack when he came in as Mankind and those kinds of things. But
mhm.
I I think WCW may have played it differently than WWE did in terms of using some of the assets of the WWE. But I don't know. What do you think?
Um, yeah. First, I'm gonna say Starcade to me will always be the video game show from the early '80s when arcades were getting popular. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you?
I have no clue.
I think you can find episodes on Amazon Prime, um, or probably YouTube. But yeah, so it was a game show
Oh,
where
it's a game? Oh, okay.
people were competing in playing video games.
Oh, and it was called I do remember that show. It was called Starcade.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't I remember the concept of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I will look that up though.
you look it up because there's one episode where like a 20-year-old is beating up a 10-year-old and like Frogger. You're like, oh, this is cool. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think, outside of Starcade, Great American Bash, Halloween Havoc, I don't think WCW had any show titles that were great,
Hmm.
let's say. Whereas like WrestleMania, Royal Rumble, Survivor Series, Summers, these are iconic names.
Hmm.
But Slamboree, um, I am blanking on every single other WCW pay-per-view, which maybe shows
I mean,
why they
Clash
went out of
of the
business.
Champions, I think
Clash of Champions good, yeah,
WWE did kind of carry that over for a
yeah.
moment too, but
World War III, yeah.
so
Fall Brawl, yeah. I don't think you need to say that. So I think if they I think if they were smart, they would have definitely kept WrestleMania.
Hmm.
And if they were even smarter, they would have kept the Royal Rumble and got rid of World War III.
Oh God, yeah,
But
yeah,
but without Pat Patterson, if he didn't come over, booking the Royal Rumble, I don't think would have worked in because again, there's so many pieces, moving in the puzzle to make something good. And as we've seen in the last few Royal Rumbles, it's not as easy as I think Pat Patterson made it look.
yeah,
So, but yeah, I think if they were smart, you use what's popular because again, you've won the company, you've won the war,
hmm,
and you want people to keep watching, which is going to be more enticing to a viewer, WrestleMania or Slamboree.
I like it. Well, I was going to ask you another question, but I think it's
Okay.
going to spin off a whole nother debate,
All
debate,
right.
but a whole nother talking point. So we're going to tease next week's show. We'll do this next week.
Yeah.
Uh, what if, because the report came out earlier this week, what if, and you can give a
All
quick
right.
little thought and then have time to think about it. Allegedly, Tony Khan was a contender when WWE went up for sale back in 2023. So just a few years ago. What if Tony Khan had been successful in that bid to purchase WWE? How would things look today? We did a tongue in cheek, or you did a tongue in cheek response on social the other day, but
I did. No, I don't remember what I said.
you said something about oh, you know what? Actually, it was Weston, my buddy Weston.
I was like,
It was something about MJF using a syringe on John Cena or something along those
uh,
lines. But yeah, it's interesting to think about and plausible. And I think that there are some folks that think it could still happen that
yeah.
Tony Khan could one day be in ownership of WWE. But I feel like that's a big enough meat on the bone to do its own episode on that. So, or do you want to talk about it now? Do you think there?
I mean, I saw that story and I saw somebody say that because Tony's bid was like $1 billion less than everyone else's,
Uh-huh.
whereas significantly,
It was
significantly
significantly, yeah, it was
lower,
a couple billion less, yeah, from what I read.
that maybe it was just a way to get a look at WWE's books and find, although then someone pointed out like that would be a case for like, if they were suing them or going to court. But I don't think if you're just offering to buy,
Hmm.
unless you get into an actual discussion,
Yeah,
if I just
right.
say, hey, I'm going to buy your house for $10, you're not going to be like, oh, well, come on in and like check it
Yeah.
out. You're going to be like, yeah, no, thanks. We're good. Um, I think if if it was going to be Tony Khan buys WWE or goes out of business, Tony Khan will buy it. But
Hmm.
I don't think, and I think the only reason for Tony Khan to buy it would be, again, library, keep all wrestling history together.
Right.
Um, I mean, as we saw with WWE buying WCW and then eventually ECW when they went out of business, one company owning everything. Again, for history's sake, great. For present day product, not good.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree. Well said. Well said.
And in that regard, too, I will also say, even though Netflix dropped out of the Warner Brothers buy, am not a fan of Paramount buying Warner Brothers either. So that's my political statement for the day.
All righty, friends. Thank you for listening. Let us know your thoughts. What if WCW had been the winner of the Monday Night War? And let us know what your thoughts are on all of that and what you want to hear us talk about in the future. We have some more WrestleMania plans coming up. Thanks for listening and or watching, and we will see you next time.